Welcome to the Church Safety and Security broadcast with the Church Safety Guys, sponsored by Checker. Background screens for your faith or volunteer organization. The Church Safety Guys is a nonprofit organization. Our mission is to inspire, influence, and impact church safety and security teams. We are protectors, guardians, ambassadors, and shepherds. We are about all things church safety and security, which starts with a ministry mindset and a servant's heart. Join us for the next hour as the Church Safety Guys unpack safety, security, leadership, and ministry operations with your hosts, James McGarvey and Mike Scully. This broadcast is also available on social media, YouTube, your favorite podcast platforms, and on the all-new Church Security app.
Hello and welcome to the Church Safety and Security broadcast with the Church Safety Guys. I am James McGarvey, and I'm joined on this broadcast by my co-host, Mike Scully.
What's up, sir?
How are you doing, Mike?
Not bad. It's been one of those days. We hit 104 degrees today, so that was a record for June. I mean, I am in Texas, but it's a bit much for June.
It's a dry heat.
Oh yeah, drier than Houston, that's for sure.
I think we hit 90 today, and the humidity, I didn't check, but all of if I remember correctly, tomorrow all of Ohio is under a tornado watch. So that tells you how massive the humidity is at the moment, and they're talking about us getting some decent size hail. So it'll be an interesting day. So anyhow, if you haven't joined us in a while, or this is your first time, welcome. There's certainly plenty of resources for your church safety team at churchsafetyguys.com, and also through our yeah, Mike's pointing to all the stuff in the background. I guess I could too, right?
Yeah.
But there's also resources on the Church Security app. And we've been able to upload some new video content to that as well, and add some extra things to that. So there's definitely some great content on there for you and your team. If you're listening to this at a later time, or maybe on the podcast or on the radio station, just keep in mind that this is kind of our disclaimer and alert that there could be some triggering words and discussion with that, but we felt like there seems to be an increase in active shooter type situations in our country in the last few weeks, and we wanted to address it from just our perspective, and offer hopefully some helpful tips and hints to help you folks listening on mitigating some of that concern and go through that. So as always, thanks for joining us. If we can ever help you out with our ministry, feel free to reach out through our website or online, and we're happy to help you wherever we can. So, it was funny. There's a history in my family of all of the men passing on Swiss Army knives. And so we do that. Like I received my grandfather's years ago, who he's passed away now, but he had one from the TV show, the same exact one. And so when he passed away, he gave it to me, and my dad got one. And so, my son has one that I'm holding on to for him, because I just don't trust him with it yet. But yeah, growing up, that was my nickname. People, because they would try and pronounce, McGarvey, and I was always the one where I had a handy tool or I had something, and they'd come to me and they'd be like, "Oh, you're the prepared guy. We're just going to call you MacGyver." So we're going to jump into the topic. We're going to talk about responding to an active shooter type situation, and we're going to go through, and we've got a few points as an outline, just to kind of share with you. And we're going to run through and talk about some of the topics and different things you can do. But for starters, we'll talk about risk, and we'll move forward. So you're welcome if you want to jump in and start on that. Or
Sure. Well, let's start out with kind of the disclaimer of the fact that churches have a tendency to immediately jump towards the active shooter threat.
Sure.
So there's a lot of folks
Yep.
out there that offer training, and we want to throw that disclaimer in the fact that the active shooter threat to the church is relatively low, historically speaking. In fact, I think I've read in a couple of places it's around 1%. And then even with that, you have to factor in that it's more likely to occur during the week than it is to occur on a Sunday service. So you look at all of that. Again, this is one of those things way more likely to have a gentleman in the bathroom who messed up his foot and need medical attention than you are to have an active shooter situation. So that all being said, I think obviously it is still a risk. It is still something that is worth looking at. And I think kind of moving on from that, that's what we'll talk about here tonight.
For sure. For sure. So we'll talk about risk planning, prevention, deterrence, detection, and then response. So starting off, we'll jump into risk, and we'll kind of talk about preparation just a tiny bit. But from a risk standpoint, I think it's important to actually do um, a risk assessment and think through, what are possibilities, what should we be prepared for, where, and oftentimes taking a look at the demographic of the area and understanding what's near us, what type of communities near us. Do you have highways? Do you have just different things like that? One of the assessments that we've recommended and seen some great use of is the CP-TED assessment that a lot of folks do. And if you are looking for that type of assessment, that's a good reference to follow up with someone that does that, because it's not just a building assessment, but it's actually a community assessment as well. And it looks at really everything that's going on around that location, and can give you potential scenarios and talk through or tabletop exercises to understand what some of those potential things are. And that kind of goes into the planning and the threat assessment. And I'll let you jump in on that.
Sure. I think the next part of that is really the fact that when you're looking at risk, you got, again, break it down. You got both the inside threat and the outside threat. So from an inside threat perspective, of course, you potentially have the disgruntled folks, something caused from internal, whether that's
Right.
a policy of some sort, whether that's a volunteer no longer volunteering, whether that is a former staff member that had to be let go, whether that is somebody who was treated poorly in student ministry, whether that's bullying or hazing or felt like they didn't belong. That's kind of all that inside threat. If you look at outside threat, then of course you have potentially domestic. You may have spillover from the local community. You may have something that's targeting your specific church. So if you're a denomination, you may have something targeting that denomination. If you are non-denominational, you may have something targeting your specific location, either because of your pastor or your status in the community, etc. And then, of course, we all have to look at it is the hate crime level, probably the least likely of all of those as far as a risk perspective, but it is there as well.
For sure. And I think to an extent, I think it's easy to get sidetracked with some of that information, because oftentimes people will say, well, wait a second, there's not anything solid or clear indicating that maybe a former employee or staff member or somebody would ever do something like that. And I think generally, oftentimes it's easy for us to be kind of in a denial state where we're like, you know what, that would never happen here. And those of you that are listening, I'm sure you've heard that before as well, where it's, sometimes churches, even talking to us, sometimes churches will say, well, there's no point in really doing that. But realistically, we need to understand and be prepared to respond to everything, even if it is a smaller percentage, just because strange things happen, and we've had situations where people have gotten upset, and we were able to de-escalate it in advance, but people got upset at messages that were preached. We've had people get upset at how they were treated over something that happened weeks and months before, and just something escalated and built into their life till the point where they felt like they needed to do something about it. And so it's a tough thing, but taking it seriously. We've seen a lot of churches in the past go through and put a committee together, a group of folks that can really come together and discuss potential good and bad, and talk about threat analysis, and talk about, what we see as potential. And sometimes committees can be a little bit frustrating. But I will say, if your church or your denomination decides to go with that approach, make sure that you have a well-rounded group of individuals that can offer different opinions and aspects, because sometimes that can cause challenges in itself. Because if you have a committee full of individuals that are one mindset, then maybe that's not as diverse as it should be with addressing different things that can happen. So usually if I'm looking at that committee, I like to have older people as well as younger people that can express opinions on concerns. And then again, you're following through with just a biblical practice of seeking wisdom from a multitude of counselors, and actually trying to be effective across the board. So definitely something to consider. So, and that kind of leads up to the prevention, and also the ability to intervene, which I kind of alluded to earlier. But if you see something, being able to understand and respond, if you see something posted on social media or some sign that something's not right, and we've called them on past broadcasts, we've called them red flags, or different things like that. But that should be a clue to be able to say, okay, this situation isn't right. We're going to monitor this, or we're going to watch this, because as we deal with different things, this could escalate, or this could de-escalate. And obviously the best plan, the best action, if you can, is to address that individual and maybe de-escalate them in the situation before it gets to that point of, having a mental health crisis, or really exploding into the church. That's not always possible. But if you see something, like a lot of folks, we talk about social media, and, we talk about see something, say something, but we really, the last couple of years especially, we've really had to take social media connected with our church very serious, because people have gone on and said different things. And there's actually a team of us now in the church leadership that will reach out to that individual if we see something that may be detrimental or less than appropriate. We'll reach out to that individual and we'll say, hey, can we talk about this? Is there something, like, maybe we can sit down with you and on a one-on-one basis, and kind of de-escalate some of this, or address some of your concerns from a church perspective. But go ahead, Mike, you were going to jump in.
Yeah, just circle back a little bit here. Again, as you're planning, really it's a shared responsibility. You want to collaborate with everybody. Back to that committee, you don't want to have it to be too big. Smaller than 10, but greater than 4. The ideal being is at least have it's not great to even have necessarily a round number. It's nice to have
Sure.
some, not that you're necessarily making a decision in all cases with that committee, but you want to at least get a good cross section, as James mentioned. But keep in mind, even the idea of planning for a potential active shooter, if we looked at the standpoint of, hey, it's low risk, hey, it's not likely to happen, but it's still important to have. The other component is that it's a church, so they are an employer, and as an employer and as uh,
Mm-hmm.
a place of worship, a place where people come to, they can be liable for not necessarily taking action and having a plan at all. So the mere action of having a plan contributes to both that liability as well as the need for safe workplace for their staff. So it's important to kind of look at that, because resiliency is a key component around that safe workplace. But as we go into that kind of prevention, we talk about those behaviors, the different things of identifying uh, triggers or people that might be uh, potentially on a hairline trigger or might be on the verge of something. You want to create an environment where it's open door. Not just the catchphrase, of course, see something, say something, but you really want to embody that to each ministry lead within the church, so that you create an environment where they feel like you're going to listen, where you create an
Right.
environment where there's active engagement, and that way you're actually expanding the potential of your team exponentially, because you're opening those eyes to an entire another set of teams.
For sure. And that's honestly, and that's an excellent point. If leadership, if folks that are leading ministry understand and know what to look for and are connected and engaged in discipling, then they will be more aware and alert when something in their area happens. Now, maybe your church isn't is a smaller church, and that's, you don't have a lot of ministry teams, and that's okay, but reach out to those folks. If you don't know that individual, it's always a great resource to reach out to someone else that does. And you don't have to necessarily, because of privacy and everything else, you don't have to necessarily tell the whole church and say, hey, something's not right with this this person. You can certainly be discreet about it, but understand that if I have that resource, if I know that person has been around someone else then for a longer period of time, and maybe they know them better, then for me, I'm okay with pulling him aside and saying, look, he posted something on social media that didn't really make a lot of sense. And it kind of sounded a little sketchy. Is this normal? Is this a normal behavior? Or is this something that maybe ramped up and has escalated based on a circumstance that he's experienced? And so oftentimes folks will say, yeah, that's pretty normal for him, which doesn't excuse anything. We should still take it seriously. But if they come back, if an individual that knows him better comes back and says, you know what, this is escalated, this is not like he's acting out, or he's being more vocal, then certainly that's a concern. And oftentimes folks just want to be heard. And so that's what we've learned with the leadership piece of it, to say, maybe a pastor and someone else can reach out and say, hey, let's talk. Because oftentimes when they do that one-on-one, it allows them to vent, and it allows them to have their moment to talk with, who they think the person in charge is. So don't be afraid to work with your pastor or your church leadership to try and de-escalate that situation. So you were going
100%.
to mention on
Yeah,
something
no,
on prevention.
you're teeing up perfectly right there, because in that idea of prevention is intervention, and you kind of were alluding to that but you got to have
Sure.
really a process. Make sure that the staff and the team and everybody know of resources internally, whether it be the pastor or otherwise, for working with people who are in crisis. In other words, if you have somebody that is potentially bubbling up and having a challenge and maybe in crisis, do you have
Right.
mechanisms by which to release that valve and turn that pressure down before it boils over and turns into some sort of grievance or aggression? So making sure that you have something in place where you can intervene helps that with that prevention strategy.
Absolutely. And I think oftentimes too, like the pastors at my churches that I attend and do ministry with, oftentimes I will say that to them. I'll say, hey, can you respond back to this person? And they'll say, well, I'm not really a counselor, I don't have that expertise. But at the same time, that pastor knows and is the figurehead of that church. And so oftentimes, and we've seen, I mean, I could tell you quite a few stories where we've seen our senior pastor just call someone, and that was enough to de-escalate and bring a situation down because they just talked with them. So having that one-on-one time, don't underestimate that, and definitely take that as and use that as a resource. So the next thing that we're going to jump to is deterrence, and I'll let you cover that, and then we'll take a quick break.
So deterrence, really, from that standpoint, is having those circles of security. We've talked about in the past, kind of concentric layers.
Yep.
Beyond that is really just the fact that you have folks kind of standing guard. This is a real case for having overt and covert. That overt can really kind of show that you have a presence.
Sure.
Having an officer in the parking lot, having a squad, whatever that might be, having cameras, having doors that are regularly locked. All of those are deterrents. When folks that reach kind of are escalating on a pathway to violence, they are going through and are going to reach a point where they're actually planning and looking at means and collecting those means and motive and opportunity. So if you are deterring and you're making yourself a harder target, you're going to make it harder for that person that is kind of, again, trying to acquire that plan to then execute. You're going to make it harder, or more likely they pick somewhere else.
For sure. And we've seen that statistically as well. I know oftentimes that's kind of a touchy subject, and oftentimes churches will argue that point with us and say, well, we just believe in covert people. And if you have a smaller church, maybe that's the easiest thing for you. That's up to each church individually. But if a church asks, typically, like if a church asks me, I can tell you at our church that we have both covert and overt people. Like we have folks that are distinguishedly marked as a part of our hospitality team or safety team. And then we have folks that will step in and do stuff that don't typically have anything except a radio. And we've blended that well, I think, for our church, and it's worked out well where we have a nice blend. I think more and more we're going to start seeing arguments for having someone physically marked, like with a polo shirt or something like that, where as that deterring factor, it just gives a better appearance, because as we see younger generations coming in and coming to churches and bringing their families in, they want to see that. They want to see cameras. They want to see folks being prepared, and they want to know that church has people, and that presence and perception, especially in large community events and activities, is beneficial. One of the big things we're coming up on is our Vacation Bible School. And that's a big community event where we're open to the public, and we have a lot of folks that come in. And if we can't have an officer, or if we don't have those resources of having a uniformed officer there, oftentimes, especially when parents are picking up kids, we will have somebody with a polo shirt or lanyard and a radio standing there, because it's a deterrent. And when the parents of the kids are coming in and picking up and they get frustrated, and I've seen this, I don't know how many times, they see a security person standing there, that instantly de-escalates them. Like they take their voice down, their countenance down, everything goes down to a more reasonable level. And oftentimes just that individual stepping in and saying, hey, how can I help you? And doing the guest service piece is enough to de-escalate that situation, and also provide a good perception and reality that our building is secure, and we take kids being secure seriously. So we actually are going to bring in our guest who just randomly appeared in our green room, and we're appreciative. So I will bring him in. So thank you, John, for joining us.
Hi guys, how the heck are you?
Hi. What's up, John?
It's all good.
Man, I'm so sorry. There was a mix up. I was literally sitting there waiting. Timing was weird. I'm sorry.
It's all good. It's better late than never, right? For sure.
We've
So
just been rambling for the last 30 minutes anyway. No, I'm only kidding.
So
Fair
we're
enough.
talking yeah. We're talking about just some different things that churches can do to be prepared for the active shooter type situation. And we kind of went through risk planning, prevention, et cetera, deterrence, detection, and response. And we're kind of to the response part of it. And we'd love for you to weigh in on your thoughts with that. And just from a response standpoint, I know you do obviously a lot of training and different things like that, but what do you think some are some of the suggestions that you might have for churches to do would be for responding to that type of situation?
Well, I mean, obviously, it's the worst day of everyone's life if we have somebody actively killing people in our church, right?
Sure.
So the deterrence and the denial pieces, the beforehand pieces, are far more important. And I always tell folks too, make sure that you don't overemphasize something that is a statistical anomaly, right? There's a couple of active killer events at churches every year in America, something like 50 million worship services. So, and honestly, if it actually kicks off, the answer here is it's not easy, but it's very simple. The first thing you have to do, I was taught active killer interdiction first by an old Alabama boy. And his thing was, okay, so somebody starts killing people in your church. Here's your 2 jobs. Ready? You got 2 jobs. First one, find him and then kill him. That's what you got to do. And everybody goes, but wait, we have all this stuff. Wait, I'm gonna back up. And you tell me when I lost you. Okay. So, find him, how do you find him? He'll be the one shooting people, right? He's making a huge ruckus right now. And probably you will know. In all of the church active killer incidents that we've seen, I mean, they either announce themselves in the parking lot by killing people, in the foyer by killing people. West Freeway was the first one that we've seen kind of make the national consciousness start in the sanctuary. But a simple thing that, listen, you got to have somebody there that's armed. The big difference between White Settlement, the West Freeway Church of Christ, and Sutherland Springs was somebody armed and willing, somebody present, armed and willing.
Yep.
Now, of course, we also talk about the fact that Jack Wilson had an incredibly high level of skill that day. And, and at the distances most people, I asked Jack this too, by the way, Jack, I said, Jack, did you really mean the headshot? Was that honest before the Lord Jesus Christ? Did you mean the headshot? And he said, I knew I needed to hit him, John. I knew I needed to stop him immediately. I'm like, that's not answering the question, sir. Or did the Holy Spirit bend that bullet a little bit? I don't know, but obviously a terrible thing. I haven't watched 2 of his friends die just immediately before. So having that well of skill, and I train a good number of church safety teams in live fire training. And I got to be honest with you, most people are not up to that task. They're not remotely up to that task. Their skills are woeful at best. And I don't berate them for that, but we do take them out and show them, okay, so here's the real thing. We're standing at 15 yards and there's a 4-inch piece of steel out there, or a 4-inch target, and you got to hit it, go. And it takes a good bit of skill in order to do that. And I think a lot of people think, yeah, I'll rise to the occasion. You really won't rise to the occasion. You'll never get above your best day on the training range. So, I do recommend a high level of training, a high level of competence. And if you have, people on your church security team, I say people very clearly, not men, not guys, men and women both, who are armed, they have to be cognizant of their skill level. And can I take this shot? Should I take this shot? And maybe do I need to be sitting somewhere else because I can't take a shot from this far away? And so in order to be part of that, I have to be closer. So that's being honest about your skill set. But the thing that I think that in the response that we struggle sometimes, that came out of the West Freeway shooting, and everyone, they always do. It's okay. So Jack gets a shot on target. 6.5 seconds it took him from the time he went, oh no, I need to get a gun in my hand, till the time that guy was laying on the ground. And an incredible shot and all that stuff. Okay, it's over. The action's over, but now everything else has just begun in the response plan. And have we talked about the response plan afterwards? Because if you watch the video, about 7 or 8 other guys with guns stream into the sanctuary, and all of a sudden it's a gun show. It's show and tell with guns.
Yep.
And okay, I get it. You might want to, have a gun in hand, all those things, but training that safe movement with firearms, incredibly important. And then, okay, Jack is the head of our security team, but guess what? He was the responder in that moment. He just took the shot that saved more people from dying. He can't be our scene commander anymore.
Sure.
So who's my backup scene commander? So who's on scene command? Who's on medical attention? They spent, of course, because of the shock and the trauma, so much time going, oh no, what are we going to do? When somebody needed to be, I'm on the medical bag and maybe we can save somebody's life. I think the other thing people don't think about is very quickly after, of course, the sanctuary erupts, right? And people are freaking out, totally natural. And then there's a huge run on the nursery and on the children's ministry because we are getting our kids and we are getting gone.
Sure.
And so how do we handle that as an emergency?
Yep.
And then, of course, we're going to get a bunch of 911 calls. There's going to be a huge flooding police response, which there should be. How are we going to handle that? The fact that they are going to lock this joint down for the next umpteen hours and triage all this with us. And so how are we going to meet the responders? How are we going to deal with the, if somebody is not gone before the cops start showing up, they may be here for the rest of the day. And of course, mad about it. And so how are we going to deal with all that? So that response plan that you talk about, James, has to include more than, do we have the skills to put a bullet in somebody who needs a bullet in him?
Sure.
But much more of what's the next steps? What is the follow-up after that? And then, of course, there's the 24-hour follow-up and the 7-day and the 6 months and the grief counseling and the trauma counseling and all that stuff that comes.
I think you break the response down, John, into kind of 3 is what we look at as how is your team, if you have one, going to respond in that moment. We saw what you explained from what happened at West Freeway. How are individuals going to respond? Do you have a program? Are you teaching craze, or are you informing folks of the congregation to understand if this 1% or lower scenario ever were to hit here? Have you even talked about run, hide, fight? Have you talked about avoid, deny, defend? Those sorts of things for the congregation. And then finally, you covered it a little bit, John, is when first responders show up, don't have anything in your hands.
Exactly right.
You have those hands up, be ready, and make sure that you're understanding. Frankly, you should be jumping in immediately to deal with potential victims. At that response, especially in the scenario you talked about, once you've verified the person's down, the perpetrator's down, it is now medical. It is immediate medical, but it's also make sure there's not a second shooter.
Well, and I think that's certainly a thing, right? That we say, okay, wait a minute. The second that we say this immediate threat is done, now is my team of armed people mentally present enough to then sweep for additionals?
Sure.
And then once they find, okay, no more additionals, this guy is completely done. Then
and he's on his own, doing his own thing.
And then but then put the guns away, and we need, even necessarily somebody else who's not part of the armed response, perhaps, to be on medical, to be on scene command, to be on triaging the chaos.
Yep. And I think it's interesting. I wanted to go back to what you mentioned when you first came on about the distance and, trying to help people understand what that really looks like. And shortly after the West Freeway situation, we actually just took a tape measure into our sanctuary, and we said, okay, because everybody, for a period of time, there was almost like an adrenaline rush of, oh, I could take that shot. I could do that. And I had him watch your video where you did it in a gun range,
Mm-hmm.
and try and replicate it. And then I said, okay, let's measure the distance of the sanctuary, because, with force perception, with the different lights, just different things like that, it's always longer than you think it is. It's always a greater distance from one point, where you would sit, to somewhere else. So just from that,
go ahead. I mean, the reality is people overestimate their skill level, and underestimate the complexity of the problem. So Ed Monk from Last Resort Firearms Training he's probably the national subject matter expert on active killer interdiction. I don't think he's necessarily focused on churches, but it certainly applies there in those things. And one of the things he does in his active shooter interdiction class, which is a fantastic class that I think every church team should really think about attending. But he has his students start at 5 yards and shoot in an 8-inch circle and then start stepping it back. If you can put 5 shots in that circle at 5 yards, we step you back to 7, then to 10, then to 15, then to 20. Is anybody left at this point still shooting at 20? Okay, we'll go 25. Is anybody left here? And that's not to shame anybody, and that's not to have a prize for the best shooter or whatever, but that's to say that's your current skill level. And if you don't know that, then you can't do what Jack did and stand and deliver. You got to move in and deliver. And that's a problem of courage, and for sure.
Yep, that's an interesting test too. I didn't necessarily do it 5 and 5 in that way, to your point, John. But we actually did test that recently at a range where we're saying, okay, can you take the Jack shot? Can you take the Jack Wilson shot? And honestly, it was towards the end of the day, and we'd been shooting all day and things like that.
Right.
And it was really more the, hey, by the way, it wasn't on the agenda. It wasn't on the direct training plan, so people didn't know it was coming. It was all of a sudden, hey, let's put him in that situation and let's see what we got.
That can be ego crushing.
Yes.
Which I think, is about following Jesus too, right? Putting to death self and all those things. So it's not a bad thing, but, recognizing, hey, man, it's funny because I think some people, I work very hard on my handgun skills. I mean, I work pretty hard at them. I train a lot. I go to the range a lot. I practice a lot. I dry fire a lot. And some people are like, well, John, not everybody can do what you do. That's just hogwash. They probably can't, real people with real jobs probably can't go to gun school as much as I do. I'm unemployable now. I'm pretty much feral. But, you can dry fire. You can get to 1 day of training a year, at least that's paid training, to help you build a new skill set. You can get to the range, man, every month or 2. It's not that much, and put a couple boxes down range and do so with a plan and have a pretty high skill level. It's not rocket science. Well, and a handgun, quite frankly, is not easy to shoot well at distance. It takes work. And the other part of that is I tell guys all the time, they show up to church safety and, well, I carry the little pocket gun at church. And I go, but the problem is that your shot has such a higher chance of being a long, difficult shot. And you're going to do that with that LCP?
Yep.
I mean,
probably not.
Yeah, gosh, man, I hope not. Because I've tried to shoot LCP at 15 yards. You would call that LCP stands for little crappy pistol, not because it's poor quality, but because it's hard to shoot, And I want the big gun with the red dot on it and all that stuff, because I got to make that shot. So,
absolutely.
And knowing that and building that, and I don't want to, honestly, it's one of my fears is that I fail on that day, and then I have to stand before Jesus and answer for that, and I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
Yep. I always joke with people. I say, "Why'd you bring your backup gun?"
Right.
So where's your real one?
Tom Gibbons jokingly calls those starter pistols. They're good at starting fights, but not very good at ending them.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Well, somebody with an LCP, and if you do, and if he finds out about it, he'll probably be mad.
One of my friends was commenting on that, and actually we were talking about it the other day, and he mentioned that the sights were really just not great sights on the LCP. And I said, here's the deal. It's not meant to have fantastic sights on it. I'm like, let's just be honest. It's meant to be a 10-foot gun, back up at maybe the best.
So, the gun that you carry when you couldn't possibly carry something else and get away with it, like
right.
ultimate decency. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that problem you're going to face in the church, man. The church I pastored was not a big church. And, my typical, from my pulpit to the back door was about 19 and a half yards. And that's not a big church. And I've been to many churches since that have double that, triple that in their sanctuary that they have to be able to hit. Whew, that could get spicy.
That's a big difference for sure. The a couple thoughts I had, I wanted to circle back to that we were talking about a little bit beforehand, but really is the in the situation where you got folks on a committee or you're planning for this, you may even have a pastor that may be stuck in denial. Well, they're not even willing to talk about this, and they're not willing to deliberate or even talk about it. So you really got to get beyond that. You really got to get to that decision to have a team, the decision to say, hey, we have to take active reasons to have a reason to mitigate and prove that. But then beyond that is, you even covered it a little bit, John, is in the sense you got to have actual decisive movement. You got to make a decision and you got to act. You just got to go. And you brought up a great point, though. I like the fact the incident command, the scene commander, if you will, from the person who was that lead from a Jack perspective is, you just took out your guy who was normally the guy, who was normally your scene commander. What's your backup?
Well, and not the least of which, because Jack was the one whose heart was still engaged and he was thinking still. So that guy goes down, he has to strafe, and now I've got him covered. I've still got eyes on him. So I can't command the rest of the scene until somebody comes and says, hey, take over this right now. Then I've just been in a deadly force encounter. Sure. And so what's going on in my lymph system right now? My brain is got cortisol and chemicals of a million different types. And I very well may have a heart attack right now. And so who's backup?
Absolutely. And that's important regardless, not just in that scenario where in an active shooter, is do you have folks on your team that can step up and become that scene commander in a moment's notice? Let's say you have flat tire on the way to church. Who's it on that day? Can they take that? Can they take that responsibility? Not every church has that luxury, I guess, or has the readiness for that. But the next thought I had really was kind of the three layers. I covered a little bit is the idea is that first layer that you really want to involve where you're training and really informing is all of your staff, all of your leaders, every ministry lead. They should understand what is your process, what is your policy, what's your procedure, how are you likely to respond in the event of an active shooter? How should they respond as individual ministry leads or even classroom leads for that matter if they're in with the kids? What's that process? And I found that there's a lot of discrepancy out there, I think, within the church community in chat and things like that, the difference between lockout versus lockdown. And I think the difference that I'll cover quickly, and then you can add any thoughts you have there, John, is locking out obviously is secure perimeter, is locking people from even accessing. Mm-hmm. Locking down is turn off the lights, lock those doors, and be out of sight, really in that sense. And I think there's immediate, I think people throw around the term lockdown kind of generically of, I'm just going to turn the lock, but they're not getting that other part.
I totally agree. And I also think I'm of the mindset, now this would be disputed by some, that even when we don't run regular fire drills, like when's the last time you ran a fire drill at church? Like you just don't, you know what I mean? But if you're smart, you have a fire plan up in various places that says, hey, here's your nearest exit, get out of the building. Here's a big fire extinguisher. And that's strategically placed, and especially your staff, your volunteers, everybody knows what that is. I think we should do that and inform our congregations as well of a basic plan. If we, again, to deny access and lock out, to lock down if we have to. Here's your exits from here. If you can run and be gone, be gone. Like it starts and you can get out of here, go. And here's what our plans look like and how that's going to work. And so I think that's not, I know some people think, well, we don't want to worry people. They're already worried.
Yeah.
We don't want to scare people or make them, tense at church or whatever. Good. Then inform them. Here's what will happen if we have this kind of emergency. So we got it covered. We're ready.
Yeah.
And that's where it gets into kind of craze and things like that, so like James and I are both certified to teach craze. That's more of a civilian response to active shooter. But not all churches go that level of informing their congregation of, hey, we have a safety team and here's what you should do if that happens. It's worth having that conversation. Not all churches necessarily, but it's worth having that conversation.
I think it's worth having the conversation because I think a couple things. Number one, it respects the intelligence of your congregation. They know that there's a problem, and they should know that there's some things in place. That to me is no different than, hey, here's our children's ministry security standards and what we do with our kids. Here's how we make sure that they're safe from, sexual abuse, but also from, being taken by somebody in a custody dispute or whatever. And that tells a congregation, no, we've thought through these things and we respect the fact that we want to mitigate risks to you. And it also provides preparation that if it happens, we have a path in place. Go walk the path. You don't have to create it in the moment.
And honestly, I think it's interesting that you say that, because every time something happens, whether it's a synagogue shooting or, a place of worship type active shooter event, the next Sunday, I have folks that laugh at me, but the next Sunday we always have more people on our schedule, more of a presence. And the reality is, as the safety director of my church, my reality is those days I switch hats. I put the PR hat on right afterwards, because most of my day is spent talking to the church elders or church leadership team or, that sort of thing. Because when that's fresh in people's minds, that's when they come to me and they'll say, hey, how are we planning to do this? Like, how are we covered? I just want to make sure that, that we've thought through all of this and just having an open and honest discussion, from that point.
Yeah. And obviously when people are grieving and they're processing, when something terrible happens, that's the time for us to help them process grief. And I look at church safety as a part of the hospitality ministry.
Sure.
That this is part of making people feel welcome and safe. You got to be safe in order to have emotional space to connect.
Sure.
You got to feel safe. And so that's part of doing that, in my opinion. And so I love that approach that you say, hey, I've got my PR hat on. It was funny. I was at a church not long ago, one of my former Bible college students from when I taught Bible college, and he's a pastor now. And he's like, John, we had a couple of problems with a guy coming into our sanctuary, blah, blah, blah. It's Easter Sunday. And we thought about having some like significant presence, like maybe off-duty law enforcement. What do you think? And I'm like, is your congregation used to having like uniformed cops on campus?
Sure.
No. I'm going to guess Easter Sunday is not the day to invite that, because people are going to show up and go, what's happening here? Like what's going on? And so it was kind of funny, because I said, look, I'll solve your problem for you this week. I'll show up and just hang out and make sure that nothing happens. And I will be your heavy that nobody knows is a heavy. Okay, cool. Thank you so much. Sure. No problem. So anyways, my wife and I and my oldest went and worshiped there on Easter Sunday. It was great. Wonderful congregation. And as we got done, it was kind of funny, because some of his guys that are kind of thinking about an informal team, they came up and they were like, man, you weren't just like posted up somewhere. You were engaged and like, a part of things. And I'm like, yeah, man, I mean, security is hospitality and hospitality is security, man. Like, I can't just, I'm not like, I got a microphone in my ear here and sorry, I'm doing security. Well, kind of check your ID or whatever. Do you belong here? That's not how you do things. That's not how Jesus wants his house.
You're not a bouncer.
Right. Exactly.
What I say all the time. It happens, but and I've done that too. I had a church that I previously actually ran the team, and they had an elevated risk day, and they had somebody that they had a known individual, and they don't normally also have cops in the parking lot, but they've had the call in the past and things like that. So I got the call that day, similar situation. Show up, and it's like, okay, no, I'm not going to put an earpiece in, and no, I'm not wearing the polo shirt, but I'm there. And it's just one of those extra layers of things that sometimes you need to do to kind of keep that significant presence down, but also be responsive enough. But I think beyond that goes into communication. I think in that sense is the communication across the teams about what you're going to do. James talked about it, is in that flurry of activity following an event in the local community or even another community, there's this attention. So the attention is an opportunity to communicate more and not just answer their question, but go even further. Because if you have a small budget, that's the opportunity to get more budget. If you have a need that you haven't addressed yet, that's the opportunity to raise that need. Yeah. Because they're already clued in, they're already focused on it, and they're receptive at that moment. So don't wait until 3 months later and then bring it up. Mention it, even if you think, oh, we're not ready for it now, but I wanted to mention it to you now. Plant that.
Right. I want it on your radar.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that's honestly, I mean, we talk to churches all the time. And in fact, I talked to one last week that reached out to me, and they were trying to start a team. And the gentleman emailed me, and he's like, hey, this is what we're doing. And he was getting really frustrated with his church leadership because they weren't acknowledging the necessity of the team. And part of the conversation was really just focused on firearms. Like, he was like, I really want to carry. We need to have a team that carries. And that's what the safety team is. And I wrote a very lengthy email back to him. And I said, look, brother, I said,
there's 100 things to worry about.
Yeah. I'm like, you're probably not going to like what I'm going to say, but you asked me for my opinion. So I'm going to tell you how I would handle this. And that's exactly what I did. I said, there's so many other things that you could focus on now, and, start gradually, plant the seed, and then come back to it, and it's always amazing to me. I mean, you've been a pastor before. I've been a pastor before, but having the perspective of a Sunday where folks will be like, yeah, I want to talk to my pastor today because I'm seeing him. Yeah. And it's like, let's pause that. Let's catch up with him during the week. Maybe not on his busiest day.
Yeah. Cause Sunday, you've got all the time in the world. We got the 47. Hey, can I just get 2 minutes of your time? Okay. All right, babe. I'll be home about dinner time, sweetheart. I love you. And I'll talk to you later. I don't want to be the head coach on this one, but I'll wave pom-poms for you for sure.
Yep. Well, you got to bring a solution. You don't bring a problem.
Right.
Is if you bring this solution, they're going to be absolutely on board with, hey, how can I help and how can I make that possible for you? But if you're giving them more problems, they're just going to think, oh, one more problem on my plate of problems.
Right. Amen. And they got enough. Trust me.
Yep.
And for every person that's coming and saying, hey, I think we should have an armed team, which I would go with. There's somebody else over here who says, Pastor, don't you dare let somebody bring a gun in this church. And I've got to balance those perspectives, and I've got to try to shepherd people in those different disparate perspectives and respect them and recognize what that is. And so, I mean, obviously I have thoughts about the matter, but I recognize and you probably, the other part of that, your pastor can't tell you, is if he has, this person over here who's like, don't you dare, he's not going to be able to tell you that because that's said in confidence and he doesn't want to rupture your relationship with that person. Yeah. And so you got to balance those two.
For sure. Well, we definitely, for sake of time, we do need to wrap up, but we definitely appreciate you joining us.
I'm so sorry for the technological hurdles, guys. Please forgive.
No, it's awesome. I will throw it back to you though, because you've got your, is it Bulletin Bibles conference planned this year? And I know you like to share about that. So
yeah, the Ask National Conference is the last full weekend in September. It's 23, 24, 25 September this year. It's in just outside of Manhattan, Kansas at the Living Water Ranch. You can go on our website, activeselfprotection.com. Under the training tab, there's a link there to the national conference, which we jokingly call Bulletin Bibles because, listen, I'm leading it. So guess what? It's conference style, right? So come to what you want. There's live fire classes, classroom classes, non-shooting classes. There is, we start every morning with devotion. If you want to come and sit and read scripture and talk about Christ a little bit and pray. We have meals together. We do a worship service on Saturday night, but it's kind of a worship service, my style. So it's kind of, church in the park. It's all a fundraiser for the Flint Hills Foster Teen Camp. They help abused and abandoned foster teens see the love of Jesus, which is incredible. It's an incredible ministry Mike and Lisa do. And they're not supported by a single church in their area either. It's all self-funded. So we get out there and help them do that. It's a fantastic weekend. We do teach our entire church safety class. So my entire full day church safety class is part of that. It's broken up, but
Sure.
I teach the classroom portion. Neil Widener, our CMO, teaches, and our training director teaches the live fire portion. So that will be in there as well. And it's a great time. It's my favorite weekend of the year. I leave it completely empty. I poured out every bit out of my bucket that I possibly have. And, I limp home on Monday or, late Monday or whatever afterwards. But it's a great time, and we'd love to have anybody there. We're not full yet, but there's not a ton of spots. And it's cool because it's not just a fundraiser, but you don't even, I have nothing to do with the finances. In order to come to the conference, you click through and make a donation to the Flint Hills Foster Teen Camps that sends a teen to foster camp for a week. And then Lisa sends us an email that says, hey, this person's registered, which is pretty cool.
Nice. Awesome. That's great. I remember you mentioning that similar last time when you came on, and found that to be just an amazing difference. There's so many folks out there doing training and doing different events and things like that. And they seem to all have this super narrow focus, but I like that you're trying to do some good and raising money for something beyond just your own organization. And I think that's great.
Jesus, when I stand before the Lord at the end of my life, he's not going to ask me, how big a pile did you leave left over, John? He's going to say, what'd you do with the gift I gave you? And he's given me a gift of this social media platform, and I get to help people every day. And that's great. Last year we came this close. I think we just broke over raising $100,000 for the Flint Hills Foster Teen Camp. And we're trying to make that more this year. They just literally yesterday had a tornado rip through the facility, and I think ripped the roof off of one building. Nobody was hurt, but some pretty significant property damage. So, okay, we'll see you in September, and we'll raise as much money as we can and try to get that stuff fixed. So,
for sure. Okay. Well, we will call it a broadcast, and thanks so much again for joining us. And as far as our resources, certainly you can reach out to us through our website at churchsafetyguys.com. Mike, did you want to wrap up something? Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I think you're going to cover the same sort of thoughts I was going to go down anyway. And John, thanks for joining us. It's great to have you on the show. We're honored that you take time to come out here and talk to the folks that are in this niche, in this world of church safety and security. So thanks for taking the time.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
For sure. All right. So we will actually next week, we are going to take a break. And because it is Father's Day weekend, we will have a pre-recorded broadcast from, I think, the last time, maybe last Father's Day. But usually what we do is we try and pick one that would be beneficial and a good topic with a guest, and then we'll play that as well. So we hope that you have a great Father's Day weekend, and we will be back actually the following week. I believe we're going to be talking about personalities again, and we'll have I believe Jason Hevner will be joining us. He's been on the broadcast before, and he'll be talking with us about just different personality traits and leading your team. And Jason's always a great guy. I actually went to church in high school with him. But he is just an amazing researcher on team personalities and individual personalities. And so we love having him come on, and he'll be a great blessing as well to go through some of that content for you all. So until next time, take care. God bless, and have a great week. And we will talk to you next time.
Thank you for joining the Church Safety and Security broadcast with the Church Safety Guys, sponsored by Checker. We hope that you found it informative, and we appreciate your feedback. Be sure to share our broadcast with your teams. Join the discussion online, and for other great resources, download the Church Security app or visit our website at churchsafetyguys.com. Remember, keep a servant's heart, a mindset of ministry, and semper disciplina. Always be training. Have a blessed week.